today. We have two panels. On the first panel is Wendy Sherman, Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. Undersecretary Sherman is joined this morning by David Cohen, the Undersecretary of Treasury for Terrorism and Financing. And we thank you both for being here. Let me say at the outset that I support the administration's diplomatic efforts. I have always supported a two-track policy of diplomacy and sanctions. At the same time, I am convinced that we should only relieve pressure on Iran in exchange for verifiable concessions that will fundamentally dismantle Iran's nuclear program, not by a month or two, but by a year or more, and that it be done in such a way that alarm bells will sound from Vienna to Washington should Iran restart its program any time in the next 20 to 30 years. Any deal the administration reaches with Iran must be verifiable, effective, and prevent Iran from ever developing even one nuclear weapon. In my view, based on the parameters described in the Joint Plan of Action and Iranian comments in the days that have followed, I am very concerned about Iran's willingness to reach such an agreement. This is not a nothing ventured, nothing gained enterprise. We have placed our incredibly effective international sanctions regime on the line without clearly defining the parameters of what we expect in a final agreement. As Ali Akbar Salehi, the head of Iran's nuclear agency, said last week on Iranian state television about the agreement, the iceberg of sanctions is melting while our centrifuges are also still working. This is our greatest achievement. Well, frankly, it is my greatest fear. Salehi may be correct. The iceberg of sanctions may melt before we have an agreement in place. That may, in fact, be the Iranian endgame. They understand that once the international community ceases banking sanctions, that they will have won regardless of whether or not we have a deal. At the end of the day, any final deal must require Iran to dismantle large portions of its nuclear infrastructure. Any final deal must address Iran's advanced centrifuge research and development activities that allow to more quickly and more efficiently enrich uranium. It must eliminate the vast majority of Iran's 20,000 centrifuges, close the Fordo facility, and stop the heavy water reactor at Iraq from ever coming online. And it must address Iran's weaponization activities at Parchin and possibly elsewhere, something not directly dealt with by the Joint Plan of Action. Experts, including David Albright, who will be on our second panel, have said that for Iran to move from an interim to a final agreement, it would have to close the Fordo facility and remove between 15,000 and 16,000 of its 20,000 centrifuges. And even then, we are looking at potential breakout time of between 6 and 8 months, depending on whether Iran has access to uranium enriched to just 3.5% or access to 20 reconverted percent enriched uranium. A final agreement should move back the timeline for breakout to beyond a year or more and insist on a long-term, 20-year-plus regime of monitoring and verification. Now, in the light of that testimony that we're going to hear today, President Rouhani, in an interview with Fareed Zakaria on CNN, said in response to the question, so there will be no destruction of centrifuges, of existing centrifuges? President Rouhani's answer was no, not at all. So that causes concern for those of us who are concerned about what this final agreement looks like. A final agreement that mothballs Iran's infrastructure or fundamentally preserves their ability to easily break out is not a final agreement I can support. If all we achieve is the essence of an early warning system of Iran's future breakout ability, and the sanctions regime has collapsed, and the only options for this or any future president will be to accept a nuclear-armed Iran or a military option, in my view, that is not in the national security interests of the United States. I know that's not anyone's goal or plan, but I also think we need to guard against wanting a deal so much that we concede more than we gain. At the end of the day, Iran can no longer be a nuclear weapons threshold state. I've made my position quite clear and will continue to do so. I have specific questions for all of our panelists that I hope you'll be able to answer to help assure us that this is, in fact, ultimately, if achievable at all, the type of deal that we can all embrace.